Welcome to today's episode, where we journey through the captivating worlds of comic book artistry and global UFO phenomena with the acclaimed Michael Avon Oeming. Known for his groundbreaking series, Powers, Michael invites us to explore UFO cases from around the world, as depicted in his new books, Blue Book and Red Book. Whether you're a seeker or a comic book enthusiast, this episode promises to expand your horizons and ignite your curiosity. And now, on to my interview with Michael Avon Oeming. So if you wouldn't mind, Michael, tell me a little bit about your background.
I'm a comic book artist. I've been making comics for about 30 years. Probably best known for my book, Powers, with Brian Michael Bendis. That's been running forever. And it's continually running even now. So it's been about 25 years of that series ongoing. It's coming out through Dark Horse Comics right now. Recently, I started a book with James Tynion, who's another well-known comic book creator, another well-known writer, called Blue Book, which was our investigations into the UFO phenomenon. And it's not specifically Blue Book, but it uses Blue Book as a compass to investigate these stories and stuff. And our first story was about Betty and Barney Hill. Three volumes are out, or 2 volumes are out now, and also through Dark Horse Comics.
That's really cool. And I can see you're being humble there as well, because you are an Eisner and Harvey Award winning comic book creator. They're like the Oscars of the comic book world. I want to make sure to get that in there because you deserve your kudos. The work is excellent.
Yeah, and I've done a bunch of little stuff. Just a bunch of stuff. I've written for Thor at Marvel, done a bunch of work at DC. Thor is probably the thing I was kind of best known for in the mainstream. But yeah, lots of dabbling here and there, but mostly known for creator-owned work. Worked a lot on Hellboy-related stuff, continuing to do some Hellboy-related stuff right now. And I'm kind of a workaholic, so sometimes it's hard to even, I'm doing this right now or that, or, to list the stuff. I'm very much about the process more than the finished work. So I'm always just thinking about what's happening right now at the moment, which is Powers and Blue Book, or Red Book, which is the spin-off of Blue Book that we're doing right now.
Yeah, that's right. And I love following you on social media because you share very often like your sketches in progress and your inking and stuff like that. And it's really great seeing how it's done professionally. I sit here and do it on my own and I'm like, oh wow, it's not that far away. It's just really the skill that I have to develop.
Yeah, that's the thing about art too, is like a lot of people, when they look at comic book art or any kind of art, and they kind of separate this idea of professionals and hobbyists, as if being a hobbyist is a bad thing or in some way. And I really wish we can get rid of that, because seeing people, one of my favorite things is seeing people who like to draw and they're just doing it on their own time. They might have a sketchbook that they don't really share. It's not being curated for anything specific. It's just something that brings you joy. And I wish more people would engage in that without having to put a label on it and stuff. So I'm really glad to hear that you're drawing and stuff. And I'd love to see it sometime.
Yeah, for sure. I'll share it with you. One of my favorite parts of traveling Mexico was seeing all artists doing exactly what you just described. Just sat down and I've got a few of their pictures because I go up and, to them, they're sketching. But to me, I was like, I'll give you $20 for that. No problem. It's a really cool keepsake of that moment captured and solidified,
Yeah, I love that. There's an archaeologist that I reached out to because I was, branching out into all these sort of subjects. I've been interested in Göbekli Tepe and such. And I found this archaeologist who was on social media, and I asked him some questions about it, and he sent me all this information. And he's also like, being an archaeologist, and so you have to draw the things that you're finding. So he started like in the field watercolor painting, and his name is Jens Norcroft, I think his last name is.
Sure.
But Jens is also a great artist who, he's an archaeologist though, but like on the side, he's painting these beautiful, landscapes when he's out in the field and stuff. And I love seeing that.
That's really cool. And that touches on an important point. I think that, you don't have to just be an artist. Art is a part of all these other kind of professions.
Yeah. I see an unfortunate amount of artists being crushed because they see the social media stuff, right? And so they think like, if I don't have X amount of followers, if I'm not making money, I shouldn't be doing this for some reason, and I've just seen people get crushed out of it. I've also seen people who, let's put it this way, they don't have a lot of real drawing skills, but they keep doing it year after year after year and putting out a book every now and then. And I admire that so much because they're doing it for all the right reasons. They're not doing it because they're the best artists. They're not doing it because they're selling stuff or, to reach some sort of weird pinnacle that you're supposed to reach as an artist. They're just being true artists, and I love that more than anything else. And I think the UFO field has a lot of that as well. There's not a lot of money in this field. I think when ufologists get criticized for, they just want to sell books. I'm like, do you know how much money they're making? There are very few people in the field actually making money. And even when you have podcasts and stuff and sponsors, that stuff is fleeting, as you know, and it's hard to build. And then even once you have it, it's easy to go away if somebody changed your algorithm. So it's funny. I see a lot of parallels between the comic book field and the UFO field.
That's really interesting. So tell me about your UFO origin story. When did you first get the bug?
That's my mom's fault. Well, first of all, I grew up in the 70s. I mean, very young in the 70s. So, we had these great programs that were really, really impactful. Of course, Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, which just imprints in your mind. There's this old television show In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy that I was watching on reruns. So the film quality had already degraded to this really creepy Blair Witch feel for anything that they were covering. But my mom and my aunt had a sighting. And my aunt is legally blind. She can barely see kind of just shapes and stuff. And the two of them were walking home from bingo one night. And my mom sees this triangular shaped classic triangle thing in the sky. And the thing that always impacted me, and it wasn't much of a sighting, it just kind of went by. But the thing that impacted me was the way my aunt would tell me, I could hear in your mother's voice that this was not an airplane, that this was something different. There's a bit of fear and confusion in her voice. And that particular story, solidified things for me. And then it was my favorite thing when they'd be sitting around. It was the 70s, so everybody was smoking and drinking and playing cards, right? And it was Jersey. And every now and then, ghost stories would come up, UFO stories. People would tell their little tiny encounters and stuff. And that was it for me. I was just always interested in it. I think early on, I got a hold of one of those Time Life series books of mysterious places and stuff. So those things. They just formulated part of my early imagination. The whole question of the what if of the world, So that was really the beginning of that, and it just stayed. It just really stuck with me.
Well, what do you think it was about it that just got its hooks into you? Was there for me, it's the consciousness and the space exploration. What is it for you?
So I've found a sort of philosophy that is threaded through all of this, through all the investigations, through the way I see most things. So anybody who doesn't like anything that I have to say, this is a good way to sort of debunk me, is that I have this particular point of view that I think so much of it is consciousness and psychology, and by that, I don't mean things you brush off or, somebody was in a panic or mass hallucination. I don't mean that. But for instance, my interest in this was that I grew up at a time where everybody had families. Nobody else around me had divorced parents or anything like that. I never even knew my father. I was just my mother who was raised me. She also struggled with alcoholism, so I was living back and forth between my mom and my aunt. And there were times where we're super poor and then times where we're just lower middle class and stuff. But the point of that was it just made me never feel like I belonged. It made me never feel like I quite fit in. So I think when I looked at these other things, it was this kind of weird way of assuring me that the world isn't quite what you think it is. That people aren't quite what you think they are, that the world doesn't spin exactly the way you're told it spin. It's not really that the sky is blue exactly for the reasons they've told you, because I didn't fit in. I didn't feel like the facts fit in. So I was always looking, everything was a what if to me, And that was the first thing that fired my imagination about all of this stuff. It was an extension of me, of not fitting in and trying to understand things. And I think that thread eventually helped me understand a lot of these cases, and especially as we did research on Blue Book and Red Book. And the longer you stay in this field, the more you'll just see it. You'll see, say, there are certain investigators that you can look at and you go, oh, they have a real chip on their shoulder about authority, about who tells us the truth, right? Who holds the answers, whether it's military or doctors or whatever. And you can kind of see that angle it informs all of their investigations and such. A great example of that, and this is a positive example, so I don't want this taken in a bad way, is Richard Dolan was a historian first, right? He was this Rhodes Scholar historian, and he started looking to the military through financial stuff, I think, and that kind of led him to the UFO stuff. Was there's look at the military through the financial lens. So you can see that thread go throughout his work. When he came up with this idea of a breakaway civilization, that totally makes sense that he would see that from that point of view, because that was his background and sort of his drive into that was his compass. That was his North Star. Sort of, where's the money coming from, right? Actually, my wife says it a lot. It's like, where does the money come from? Just follow the money. It's almost always the answer. So that's kind of what drives me, which I like because it's helped me understand a point of view better, which is really hard because this field is so crazy and some of it just that doesn't make any sense at all. That a point of view is really important. Otherwise, you just get lost in the weeds, and the next thing you're talking about, crystal ships from pyramids flying upside down or whatever,
Yeah, it gets outlandish. So
yeah, and not to say that things can't be outlandish, but like if there's zero proof to it, if it's just pure speculation, that's great. Just leave it to be speculation. Like, I like the old Von Däniken what if kind of situations, right? I think it scared me. I was getting a haircut like 5 years ago. Maybe it must have been longer than that. But the topic of ancient aliens came up, and the way that this person, like, at first I was excited because I liked the show for a very long time. It's like sort of the earlier days. And, but I realized as this person was talking about, like, they think this is a documentary. Like, this wasn't fireside, what if modern mythology stuff to them, or, open your mind to outside the box thinking things like, oh, this was a fact. He saw this on television. He believes this is a fact. That started to scare me. I don't know. I'm starting to ramble now. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. And yeah, I know exactly what you mean with that. Have you, you just told me about, your mom and your auntie having a sighting. Have you ever had a sighting?
I have tried really, really hard. Both my wife and I have tried really hard. There are some places out here in the Northwest. We live just outside of Portland. And there's a place called, which mountain is it? Mount Adams, which is known for its UFO sightings. It's where Kenneth Arnold, it was in between Mount Adams and Mount Rainier where he had his sightings. And there are sightings there and weird stuff that happens there. It's kind of this East sort of place. Or the ranch there is called East City, where they have a bunch of weird things that happen. And we've been there a couple times looking to see stuff. We saw some neat anomalies in the sky, but nothing that you just couldn't really explain with anything. Beautiful setting, beautiful place. But yeah, we didn't have it. And I've really, really tried all the sort of like the Stephen Greer BS about like, using your consciousness to reach out and all this stuff. And like, nobody wants it more than I do. And I just have not had any experience with UFOs at all. It hasn't stopped me from trying. All of the sort of new way that I've looked at the information that we get and how we get it and why we get it hasn't changed the fact that I still believe people's individual stories. If you can believe that individual, like I think those personal stories are much more important than anything coming out of the any of these organizations that we have right now. But no, I've not had an experience. I've tried really hard. I've kept my mind as open as possible to it. I've tried calling an experience, just doesn't happen. Which also led me to think like on that consciousness bent of things is maybe I don't need to see it. Like maybe there's something completist about the way that I'm both skeptical and wanting to believe that I'm just outside of the equation of whatever this psychological phenomenon is. Because I do think a lot of it is driven somehow by our consciousness. And I don't know on what level. I wouldn't put a flag on that at all. It's just my best guess because of the way the phenomena has changed with us as society over time. Seems to reflect our psychology.
Yeah, I hear that. And, kudos for going out and giving the CE5 a good try and stuff like that. I guess Stephen Greer would say you're the wrong frequency, Michael. That's the problem. You don't believe enough. Pay me $5,000 and I'll show you in the desert. That kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'll stick my neck out because I'm not so deeply into the UFO field that I have to worry about reputation or whatever. But like when somebody like Stephen Greer presents that they have all of the answers so confidently, just don't waste time on it. It's so clear that I think he was involved with some real stuff early on, like real information. And you'll see this pattern time and time again. It ends up not being enough. And people just want more, and I kind of can't blame them for that. But like it gets to such a level like where you're just making stuff up to trail people along with stuff. And it's only gotten worse in the past 10 years or so. Not just with him, but with others. It's really bad and it's disheartening. It's the last thing that our field needs. But this all goes back to early days of ufology. As we were doing research on Blue Book and Red Book, we were looking at like the Kenneth Arnold stuff and his very real experience of seeing something and his investigations and how much of his life he spent dedicated to this, and he's doing all this research, right? And then he gets involved with, I wrote his name down. He did the Strange Stories magazine, Ray Palmer, right? Ray Palmer does these magazines. Like there was that, and another one called Fate magazine. And during his investigations, one of the things that Kenneth Arnold investigates is the Maury Island incident. With I have to write down names. I have a terrible memory. Dahl and Fred Crimson. And like at a certain point, these dudes admit they just faked everything, that they lied about it all. This is the Maury Island incident that is so popular in the UFO circles where I've seen special after special about it, right? I've seen full documentaries about it. I've seen podcasts all completely dedicated to it. And they all leave out the fact that they admitted that this was faked. And what was sad was that even Kenneth Arnold, when he wrote an article for Fate magazine, knowing that they admitted it, still perpetuated that this was a true story. It left that part out. And I think it's because he wanted to believe so badly that he probably felt like, oh, they're being pressured by the FBI into saying that this didn't happen. Because remember, there was like 2 airmen who died during the investigation of Maury Island. Right? And when it became serious, that's when they seemed to crack. And like maybe Arnold was like, oh, they were forced to say that, or they got scared because of the military death and stuff like that. I don't know what his reasons were, but there's such a need for people. If you have one experience, you just don't want it to end, and I can understand that, but it's kind of ruined the UFO field,
Yeah. I'd agree with that. There is absolutely a thing in the UFO world that, people have that one experience and then they want to have more. So they start faking these things and, that one is enough, it's intriguing as hell.
Like Greer, like he was a really important part of the field. Like he really helped get some of the first, I don't know, I apologize for not getting the terms right, but like a congressional hearing or something like that. He got the government to really talk about this stuff. And that still could have been his angle going forward. But instead, he can name the aliens, where they're from, what they're thinking, what their motivations are. He can look at like a JPEG online and tell you that it's a female Palladian something or whatever, and it's rough. It's rough, because he had something real going on. And then, it's also devastating because I constantly see like the other real hucksters like Jaime Maussan, and like people still going, oh, what if maybe this time he's not faking it? And I'm like, how many pyramids can you fall for? How many times does somebody have to lie to you in real life? I bet most people wouldn't take it, but some reason in the UFO thing, we want it to be true so badly that we're willing to just put our hand back in the fire again and again and again. AI Atlas with another thing came and went. Could have sworn it was the end of the world. This was disclosure that NASA is hiding things, like, and all this stuff. And then as soon as it passed, well, it's not going to get you clicks anymore, so nobody really talks about it now. Suddenly, it's forgotten. And I'm being really bitchy because I've been around for so long. I've just seen a pattern, and I went from wanting to believe this sort of information to seeing like, oh wow, the only thing I can count on are personal experiences, because the smoke and mirrors, or as like Linda Moulton Alex would say, was it the quicksand? You're standing on a quicksand made of molten lava thing or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. It's frustrating. It's really frustrating.
Yeah. Part of it for me is, if the creator comes back around and says, hey, I got this wrong, it's actually, an asteroid, or they're actually not real mummies, I'll respect that. I'll follow them longer. But the second that someone, goes for that clickbait and then doesn't hold themselves accountable, I think it shows that they just disrespect their audience. Yeah.
And there are good ones out there. There's a new guy, and I apologize, I forget I only remember his handle, which was like Elroy Spacely. Sorry, somebody will get it in the comments, but he's really good. He's a new guy on the scene who keeps things pretty straightforward. I should have written his name down, but so I'm trying not to crap on everything and everybody. There are people out there really doing their best to just cover stuff. And those who are really good at skating the line between speculation and keeping things fun, while being serious about what you're investigating. Like, you can be an entertainer in this as well as as an informer or whatever you want to label it. It doesn't all have to be super serious, like Richard Dolan, whom I love, but you can have some fun. You can do the what if thing. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I love about your work with Blue Book and Red Book. So let's get into it with these. So with Blue Book and Red Book, Blue Book covers the American stuff generally, and then Red Book is looking at China and Russia. There's a little bit of the kind of modern day stuff in there, but it's mostly, the red and the blue. Just go with those colors. It'll make sense.
Yeah.
Highly recommend them to everyone, especially, that Betty and Barney Hill story. I read that as you were putting it up on Substack bit by bit. And now it's available collected, and it really brings a tear to my eye. I think you told this story beautifully. What was it about that story that you were like, that's the one we're starting with?
When James Tinian, who's known for like Nice House on the Lake and Something That's Killing Your Children, reached out to me. We had kind of only been friends online a bit. We never really knew each other. But he knew I was into UFO stuff, and he had this opportunity at Substack where they were like giving us a budget to just do anything. Because this isn't typically the kind of book that would be able to sell or survive in the comic book market. And what we wanted to do was to just tell the stories really, really straightforward, without speculation, without anything additive to it. And our first story was Betty and Barney Hill, because, again, while it wasn't technically a Blue Book story, the idea of the title Blue Book was just a compass for us to sort of tell the American history of this. And they just have a great story. It's the template for everything. There are strong reasons to believe them. Being an interracial couple in the 60s, you're just putting a target on yourself for all kinds of stuff, including, like, you take that aspect out of it, just talking about this stuff in the 60s, you could lose your career. It happened all the time. Ridicule that was like way beyond what happens today. Great story. And as I did research on it, especially the people, like, I just became so invested in Betty and Barney Hill as human beings. Like, the more you learn about their stories, the incredible pressure Barney was under with just his job. And he had a son who lived out of state, which I could relate to. That's my own. I have that as well. So, like, he had these crazy drives and back and forth to see stuff. Betty reminded me so much of my aunt, my mother. So I really want to tell their stories as humanly as possible. And James and I worked really hard to do that, to like not forget who these people were. And the story itself was also fascinating because it's that kind of thing where it was the template of what UFO abductions are, And it was very much of its time. You're talking about landing gears and bolts and maps and stuff, right? Where now everything is sort of like light beam based and, gravity defying and stuff. But the technology that they were experiencing was matching the technology of the UFOs at the time, which I think is this another layer of like, well, what is going on here? Why does it seem like in the 60s and 50s, 60s and 70s, you had rockets, landing gears. They would talk about plumes of rockets coming out of these UFO stuff and like, actual bolts. And then that all sort of disappears. It doesn't quite make sense that, their technology is just changing the same time as ours. There's other explanations to this sort of stuff, but again, it leads itself to like, there's something psychological going on here, whether like, I kind of suspect, and this is very woo, but I sort of suspect that like a lot of what we're seeing is some sort of wake from our consciousness. Like, it's not that we're creating it purposefully. It's sort of some sort of weird echo that somehow is happening, that so people are seeing things that relate to their time or somehow make sense. Because otherwise none of it makes sense. Even the DNA stuff, all of the abduction stuff. I was listening to a story today about how to study this section of the Amazon, they grabbed some spider webs, and in the spider webs, there's just DNA from animals who have passed by. And it's like, you didn't need to abduct the animals. You didn't need to take them into like, a van and like, open up their mouth with the tongue depressor and look into there, or, look into their ears, or take skin samples, or force the eggs out of them or something like that. All of which Betty and Barney experienced. But we know now, a short time later, like the way you get DNA is just so much easier. So like none of the abduction stories make sense in the context of what we know. But I don't disbelieve when people say that it happened to them, depending on the person, of course.
Sure. Yeah. I tend to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I've had my own crazy experiences. So I think like, who am I to tell someone they didn't have like an experience where they saw, I don't know, a giant werewolf or something? I'm like, crazy things happened. I've had my own,
Yeah.
But there's a line until if the person proves themselves untrustworthy, then I no longer believe it. And that's the way it's gone with, earlier you mentioned Jaime Maussan and the Nazca mummies. Now that's beyond the pale for me. It went from, well, I'm curious and I'm intrigued, to now I'm like, oh, so they've been manipulated. And the argument is, no, we manipulated this one and this one and this one and this one and this one, but we promise the next one is real.
Exactly. Yeah. It drives me nuts. So then Blue Book, it started with that. And then we went into the early years of 1940. The second volume is called Blue Book 1947, where we get into Kenneth Arnold and a bunch of that. Well, some of the stuff I was just talking about, like Red Crimson and Dahl and Maury Island, the early Roswell is in there, alien autopsy stuff. Lots of fun. And again, we try and do our best investigations that we can, and not, by investigation, I mean research.
Sure.
And, just not to do anything additive, and not to ignore any of the stuff that we find that might like totally topple the story, like the Maury Island thing.
Yeah. Then you move from Blue Book to kind of looking outwards around the world. And I just emphasize here that these books are excellent. If you're kind of in the UFO subject and you're like, I know a few, I know Roswell, I know the Tic Tac, but I'd like to know more. These books are excellent for like some smaller cases, the big hitters, but also when I was reading it, there were some I didn't know either. So from there, you go into Tunguska, Dyatlov Pass, Lake Baikal. There's some crazy stories. Please tell me what you think of those stories. And if you wouldn't mind, just kind of paraphrase the stories just to give the audience a little context.
So Red Book came from the idea of like, actually I wanted to do it completely fictionalized at first. I was like, oh, imagine like the X-Files in a country where questioning the government, especially talking about military bases and stuff like that, will just get you thrown in jail. Right.
Sure.
So that was the beginning of it, which is funny because later I find that they had their own sort of X-Files, that, their own official government investigation into this stuff. But ultimately we decided, let's just keep it like the rest of the series, right? So let's investigate what are the stories come out of Russia and China. And finding information on that was really, really hard, because it is like the world's worst version of telephone. Like, it's a story that is repeated in another magazine and in another magazine, often translated, which then causes problems. And it made it really, really hard to find stories, because most of the stories were small. There were sightings of a light, right, that a lot of people saw, or a military jet followed a light, but how do you make that into a story was difficult. So I began with one of the most fascinating stories, was Dyatlov Pass, which, for those who don't know, is a story about a set of Russian hitchhikers who go out to the Ural Mountains. Pardon me, I'm forgetting the years, 60s or 50s, I think in the 60s. And they go missing. When they are found, their bodies are found in just the most bizarre circumstances. The tents in this freezing cold weather seem to be ripped from the inside out. Many of them weren't dressed, or they were barely dressed, as if they were rushing out through a panic. Their bodies were found sort of scattered throughout this area. One was weirdly like under a log or something. It was very Blair Witchy, you know? So a lot of these, like, what happened just became the mystery. And there was a story of, well, in their stuff, they found, like a camera, and had all these photos of these people. And again, doing the research, it was really heartbreaking, because at first it's just this crazy story, but then as you're seeing the photos and you're learning the names, then these were real people, and they just remind you of people. These were young college kids having kind of one last adventure before they went out into the real world. So it's, you get a sense of their personalities through their photos and everything, and it was a bummer. But one of the photos, it looks like they saw like a Bigfoot. This is looks like this creature just hunched over in the distance. And ultimately, I think it's just one of them, just a bad picture of somebody in the distance. But that was one of the things that led to the question of, were they attacked because their bodies had suffered like contusions and stuff, and like somebody's head was kind of bashed in. Then there's stories of like UFOs, because other hikers had seen lights in the sky the same night that around the same time these people went missing. All these crazy mysteries behind it. Questions whether it was like a military strike or a secret military weapon that accidentally killed them, or maybe they saw something they shouldn't have seen. Ultimately, I don't think it was a UFO story, but it's this deep, deep, deep well of mystery. And it's, if you look into it, you'll only get more questions as you go into it. And then that all ties into something very common, which is simply government cover-up. Whether it's a cover-up or just the non-transparency of governments. So it raises more questions as you look into it. So that was one of the big stories. Another one that was really fun was Lake Baikal, which is like the deepest freshwater lake in Russia, where there's a report of Navy divers who went down there, and they saw these fish dudes, like literally like Abe Sapien from Hellboy, like, these underwater 10-foot tall fish guys, and they were ordered to capture one. And they attempted to capture this thing, and it like blasted them out of the water through some sort of force. And because they were so far deep down, several of them got the bends, a couple of them died. There was all this intimidation towards witnesses afterwards, and I asked questions, a lot of your typical stories there. And then one of my favorites was from Russia, because there's other ones from China, but from Russia was, I cannot pronounce this correctly, but like the Petrozavodsk incident, which is like this giant jellyfish creature that was seen in the sky. Yeah, and there's photos of it. It's great. I think it's super, super clear now that what we saw was a rocket launch. We're much more familiar with it now, but then what would happen? Well, what happens is when a rocket goes into the air, it might be night here, but then the plume gets caught by the sunlight coming over the atmosphere. So then it illuminates, and it can be very, very weird. Like 10 years ago, there was a thing called the Russian spiral, or the Norway spiral, which was this light in the sky, and it just looked like a dimensional porthole opening up. Just with people having more cameras and stuff now, we kind of know what it is, but at the time they didn't, and it caused like all kinds of panic. And it eventually led to them opening up their own X-Files in Russia, this thing called Institute 22, which was led by serious Russian physicists and scientists and doctors to try and do all these investigations. One of which was, I think it was after that incident, it took place in Voronezh, Russia, where This is the weirdest story I've ever heard for any UFO thing ever. It's this egg-shaped thing that lands in the middle of, it's not Moscow, it's Voronezh, which like isn't that far from Moscow, but, and this weird aliens come out of the egg, and like it's in a park where kids are playing soccer, and there's all these witnesses. And the thing looks bizarre. It's like one of these UFO sightings where it doesn't look like an alien, it looks like a robot or somebody in a robot. There are different incidences. It was very, very hard to get the real story on this because it had been repeated so many times. There are different versions of the story. And really none of these kids seem to have ever been interviewed as adults. But in one of the stories that one of these creatures like froze one of these kids with some sort of ray and he disappeared. And then they brought him back moments later and like everybody panicked and ran. And it's just a crazy, crazy story. And it made if you were around in the 80s, you would remember it from, all the sort of UFO rags at 7-Eleven and stuff. It was that big of a story. It was so big that in Japan, they made a toy out of the alien robot creature that came out of the ship.
That's really cool. I really want one of those toys.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, though, like a lot of the stories that came out of Russia and China, not a lot of them actually involved aliens. Most of them involved just sightings. Part of that, I think, is because in Russia and China, you just in these times of heavy communist control, you got to be really careful what you talked about, especially in China. If anything seemed kind of spiritual, or anything that spoke against the state, the authority of the state, or even the philosophy of the state. And I paused because even as I was saying that, I realized that actually happened here in the United States as well. So if you remember the stories of George Adamski, and he was talking about these space brothers who wanted peace. We're all going to blow ourselves up, so we have to disarm. Sounds like it makes sense, right? But if you're in a paranoid 1950s state, you're like, oh, these are Russians pretending to be UFOs or starting a UFO cult over here to get Americans to disarm and to accept a communist life where we're all equal and we're all taking care of each other. And we don't want that. That's bad. So like we had the same problems here, so there's a weird narrative. But it was heavier. It was definitely heavier in Russia and China where you can get in real trouble. You could end up in prison and stuff. So I think that's why most of the stories we got was like, I saw something weird in the sky, and then of course, cause that's all useful too, because most of these stories ultimately seem to be about national security. So I think Russia was using national security issues the same way that America uses national security issues, using UFOs as a cover up for these things and to, get more money. And especially to get more money for private companies who are being subcontracted for this stuff.
Yeah, there's not a lot of money in the UFO community, but in pretending to make UFOs with black projects, there is billions of dollars in that.
Yeah. It's pretty transparent. I'm going to go out on a limb and make some enemies here. I don't know that this is true. Well, I mean, I know that it's true. Like the whole Bigelow thing with Skinwalker Ranch, like he got money from the government to do this study, right? Like there was, I forget how much money it was, but in order to even start like investigating, he got a grant of some kind. So
I think it was 22 million.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was like that, right? So you're already this rich dude, and then you talk to other rich dudes who are going to get you these contracts, right? So like, I don't doubt that people have had experience at Skinwalker Ranch, but when I look at the origins of it, I just see money. Like that's what I see. Like the beginning of the Bigelow thing was an investment. That doesn't, I think he has real actual interest in all this stuff, but the two go hand in hand. Like almost all of the stuff that we're looking into when it comes to a story that comes from a government agency. And I'm not one of these dudes who's like, oh, you can't trust the government no matter what, but it's always money. It's always money. It's always money. And all of these programs, you can always trace it back to somebody making money someplace. And again, that's why your personal story, if you meet me at a comic book show and you tell me about what you saw, I can look at you and I can listen to you and I can share that moment with you. But you tell me about the latest AARO investigation, or, oh, we don't know what these drones over New Jersey is, and let's get everybody wound up and like, oh, there happens to be like a bill needing to be passed around the same time for such and such, arms thing or whatever, or defense thing or whatever. And then a year later, like, oh yeah, we know what the drones over Jersey were the whole time. So again, it's just always money, money, money. And again, Richard Dolan was great at figuring that out before anybody else.
Yeah, he was. Dolan's been excellent on just, sticking to, what he knows and his expert opinion and shedding light on that.
And again, I don't doubt that, Bigelow has interest in this stuff and that he's benefited the UFO community. I think he's an important figure. But again, I can't help but not see the money at the beginning of it.
Oh, totally. I'm completely with you. And the modern day thing seems to be, Peter Thiel, and you can see all these, YouTube channels kind of being funded by this guy while he's making inroads to government databases and things like that. And it makes you narrow your eyes and just think, what are you doing? If I had that much money, I wouldn't be doing that. I'd be trying to help people.
But also, if you have that money and that interest, why not do both and just be transparent about it?
Sure.
I want my contract to make a space hotel. And one of the reasons I want a space hotel is I want people to be able to see what is out there. Like, I believe that they're here. So here's my money, here's my infrastructure, and here's what I'm doing. I mean, the guy running Skinwalker right now, Brandon Fugel, seems to be sort of like that. Like, he's like, I'm an investor. I make money. I'm going to make money doing this. This is a show. The show has to make a profit. I am deeply interested in this phenomenon, just be transparent about it. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I get on these rants.
No, I'm totally with you. Like, I've been known to have these rants too, so I'm right there with you, Michael. One of my favorite pages from the run of Red Book was the 1892 Tianjin, China sighting. And I thought that was so cool for a multitude of reasons. One, because of the art style you chose. It goes very traditional, kind of, Chinese old school paintings. But also to those historical sightings are often most difficult to kind of get a witness report from or to depict accurately. So I was wondering, how did you fare with that? How much information did you find on it?
That was my favorite story. Probably because it's an artist, right? It's an artist who saw this. So and he's a super famous artist. This guy named, I wrote it down someplace. Wu Ryu. And, he's famous for there's probably thousands of his art prints that records everyday life in China from that time period. And where I got the most information from this, believe it or not, I believe was Christina Gomez, who's a podcaster and a YouTuber about this information stuff. And she covered the story because it was hard to find. It's strange that this was another story that was just hard to find. And like the best I could really find was sort of his translations of the guy's observations. And one of the reasons why this is such a great story is because as an artist who would just record everyday life, he would also record like what people were thinking and what they were doing or why they were putting together this pile of reeds or whatever. So like he's kind of the first ufologist because like it was him and his son and they witnessed this UFO. He does this drawing of it. He interviews people about it, right? And there's like a dude and it's like the same conversation. So this dude's like, oh, it was just a lantern. It must have just been a lantern. And they're like, yeah, but the winds don't go in this direction and the lanterns can't last as long as this object lasted, so they had the same sort of, even though it's over 100 years ago on the other side of the world and a completely different culture and a completely different setting, same sort of observations to it from excitement to, I got things to do. I can't just sit here and look at an object in the sky all day. It's my favorite story and it was my favorite story. And emulating his style was a lot of fun too, because I had to kind of Frankenstein a few pieces together to make it fit into like a comic book format. But yeah, he was like the first molder. I even thought, oh no, this could be a spinoff. Like I'm just going to draw stories about this guy doing UFO investigations.
That'd be a cool series.
Yeah.
That's really cool. How do you stay neutral when adapting these to the page?
Well, I don't know that you can. My wife and I talk about this all the time. We watch a lot of documentaries. We're both writers, and so we're always talking about like narrative stories. And whenever you're trying to be as quote true to the facts as possible, you're already picking a narrative of some kind. And in these, like, if I find something that debunks the story, I just won't not put it in. I won't be afraid to put it in, So like that jellyfish Petrov story thing of, it's so clearly just a rocket launch, right? And I don't want to say, well, I don't want to say that because it'll take away the mystery of it. You just leave it there. I think the experience that people had of seeing that thing for them was such a true experience. Like, you don't know what it is. You don't have any context. You just see this glowing jellyfish up in the sky, and it stays with you for the rest of your life. And I think that's just as important as whether it was something supernatural or not, to those people. Right. And I think it does a disservice to everybody to then not provide an explanation. I also think going out of your way to debunk everything, it's just fine to say you don't know. You don't have all of the information. There are several things in my life, and I bet there are things in your life and everybody listening to right now, where they're trying to put together something that happened to them, and like the timeline doesn't quite work out. Right. Or there's some element is missing. It's like, well, we moved from this place to this other place, but I remember working this job, but that was in the other town, but it was about the same year. And like, I just must be messing something up. And that's all we do. But then if this is UFOs, now it's like, oh, that's proof that this was a lie, or that's proof that this supernatural thing happened. And it was supernatural because my keys were missing when I walked into the room. When I came back in, they were in the same spot, as opposed to I just, had a brain fart and couldn't see it. But like, we're constantly missing context to things, and then giving it an attribution that it doesn't belong to. Great example of that is, like, if you ever watch a great crime documentary and they talk about like a serial killer. I remember we were watching one about like the ones in California in the 70s. They were so prolific, these serial killers, and they would show, they had witnesses who said so-and-so looked like this. He walked with a certain kind of gait. He wore a certain kind of shirt. And then they would find these people who had that exact same description. And you're sure as hell it's them because they match every single bullet point that the witnesses said. Turns out it's just not that person. It is just these coincidences. And this brings me to the point of ufology that I want to strangle people every time I hear. There are no such things as coincidences. When people say that, I'm like, of course there are such things as coincidences. Because they're happening around UFOs and supernatural stuff. Sometimes those coincidences are in themselves almost supernatural or are supernatural. But most of the time, like, if something doesn't line up, it's okay. You're just missing some information. It's not always a conspiracy. A lot of it is just the mystery of missing information. Like I said, in my own life, there are certain things I can't quite put together. It's not supernatural. It's just you've forgotten something or you weren't privy to certain information. And I think that happens all the time in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. Ambiguity seems to be a part of so many different UFO experiences, to the point where I wonder, is this almost something we impose on it, or it's like an operating procedure of the UFO? There's always like, be ambiguous.
Well, for all my doubts that it sounds like I'm having, like, I'm sure people are like, oh, he's a naysayer and stuff. Like, I'm actually not. My explanation is more woo than any of this other stuff. Like I said, I think it is some wake of our consciousness is creating this effect around us. Like, I think people are seeing things, and I think they are looking as strange to people as they see. But I think it has something to do with, maybe that theory that our brains are receivers rather than the originators of our consciousness. So that there is these sort of weird echoes that can happen, so that we can have these strange experiences that don't necessarily make sense. So I'm not saying these things don't happen. I think trying to make sense of them, we'll get lost. We'll just, and that's why it does seem to be purposefully ambiguous. That seems to be the pattern, the ambiguity.
Yeah, absolutely. Just when you feel like you've got a handle on it, it changes shape. Like that. That's what it feels like to me.
Everybody says this, and all of them, even Dolan, who is very like, scholarly and puts things into order, and he's like really great at like just lining things up and putting things into that are labeled spaces, right? Like even he came around to this, like this is a consciousness thing, because the more you look at it, the more the nuts and bolts don't make sense, the more the consistency doesn't make sense. Even if you're talking about multiple alien presences or interdimensional, extra-dimensional presences visiting us, like it just none of it actually really makes sense. Why if you want to be so secretive do you have flashing lights? Why if you want to be invisible are we seeing you? Why if you need DNA do you need to like pull stuff like we're cows from the 1960s and do stuff? Why are you leaving the evidence behind of the cows? And why did the cows go missing? People go missing all the time. Well, why don't the cows go missing? Why do they leave their stuff behind? What is that about? Again, typically, I think most of this stuff just ties into. It's a very, very, very useful cover for the government for legitimate, straightforward weapons testing or opacity or ways to hide money, ways to siphon money. Again, usually it's just money.
Yeah. It's a big theme in this, right? In one of the hearings, AOC brought up, the money. Like, hey, let's follow the money. And it just doesn't seem to be being followed up. But I was like, yes, finally, someone's saying it.
Yeah. The problem, almost all these problems, because they involve money, they'll never get solved because, unfortunately, I think the money is it's like a tether. And this tether ties people with the money. People invest it in the money, even enemies, even political factions who don't like each other, even social factors that don't like each other. If they pull at that thread too much, it's a self-defense mechanism. They have to defend each other, So like, even if you're in the government and you see that, there's a subcontractor of a subcontractor that I know that, my enemy is making money off of, and I can nail him on this. Well, there goes my stock portfolio, like my very important stock portfolio. Like everything I'm invested in will collapse because of this other financial collapse, So it's a really sad state to be in, because I don't see how change can happen either in the ufology field or the other stuff that we're facing.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And again, just like you, it's why I listen to people and not the government. I figure government disclosure is for the people out there that haven't had the experiences that I've had, or haven't really touched this subject. It's for them. I'm already on the boat, right? Like believing this. So there's so much to do and to learn and to just research without waiting for this authority that changes up every 4 years in this country anyway, and in other countries it's different. And it shocked me a bit, and you touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to highlight for people that basically in China, it's fine to research UFOs if you're a nuts and bolts person. The second you get into the woo, it is an ideological kind of butting heads with the government, and people have literally been thrown in jail over it. I find that so curious. It would almost be better if they just said, like the US, like, no, this is all stupid. Don't look at any of it. Instead of like, no, that bit's real, but don't look over here.
Oh my God. And it's very, very hard to, it's the layer of onions, the question wrapped within a riddle within an onion thing. Like, so like, as I was looking at this with China and like, this organization, Falun Gong came up, which is, this sort of spiritual thing that ties in like Tai Chi with, alien contact. The George Adamski guy, kind of like that stuff overlaps with the sort of like space brother talk and stuff. And like, they were being really persecuted by the government. And then I was doing more research into them. I found out that they're a cult, and like, they're like a real cult, like the way, not just, like, again, taking people's lives and monies and, and it became so like, oh my God, like, I don't even know how to write about this anymore because I don't want to make, this. It was really, really hard. And just finding real information, like what is real information, in this day of the internet. And it's not just the internet, it's the books. I contacted you about the last issue of Red Book. Like I want to get some of the newer stuff to make sure that I was nailing it correctly. Not the opinion stuff, but like that I'm using the right terminology and getting the right acronyms for these groups and stuff. because my greatest fear is what I've seen in my research and in Tinian's research on this, is that something will be printed in a book. That book is highly lauded. It could be a mistake that's in that book or a purposeful misinformation. And it gets repeated and repeated and repeated to the point that it's not, we lose that information. And that's only been compounded worse on the internet. There were so many times I'm looking up these stories and I can't get the facts straight because I'll find conflicting facts, especially coming out of Russia and China. That they were much harder.
Yeah, I bet. We all owe a big thanks to George Knapp for getting those files out of Russia so that we can look at them, right?
Absolutely. I remember when seeing that special when it came out, like going over there and getting the stuff, and then George's like stories. It's right out of James Bond, where he had to he could have gone to prison forever. He could have gotten disappeared. Is what could have happened to him.
Yeah.
So George is a hero in my book. I really admire all of his work and stuff.
What responsibility do you feel towards the witnesses when you're telling their stories?
I try to find their words exactly and use their words exactly, and try not to take those words too far out of context. And I say too far because, this is a comic book, so there's limited space, right? Like, it's not like I have a page. Each page typically has 5 panels. That panel is taken up by an image, and there's a little tiny space in that panel for word balloons. So I try to be really careful. A real interesting eye opener. We covered Paul Benowitz a bit, and what happened with him and Richard Doty. And there was such a strong narrative around Doty. It wasn't really until I was able to find more information and some of Doty's own words that I realized, he's not quite the supervillain that I thought that he was, or had painted in there, And I thought it was also fair to him to use his own words to represent him and his motivations in the story. I think he got a lot of blame for what happened with Paul Benowitz. But I've had experiences with, mental stress and this sort of stuff. And there's just more to it than this narrative that we like to use and cast somebody as a villain. I'm not saying it's the opposite of that. I'm just saying there was more to it than I realized.
There's gray areas in real life, right?
Yeah, and my responsibility, as you're asking, was to just not paint him as a one-sided villain. It's just not the way things are. And when I find a really kooky story, there's one of the Chinese stories was I think his name is Meng Zhao. He was a dude he's the only UFO alien contact I could find coming out of China. And his story is wild, like really wild. Like, he was like abducted by these creatures who were, escaping, Shoemaker Levy destruction, on, is it Jupiter where Shoemaker Levy?
That's right. Yeah. Where it broke up into multiple parts and crashed into Jupiter.
Yeah. So he had these sexual encounters with these aliens who wanted him to impregnate them to have their lineage continue. And crazy story. He passes a lie detector test at some point later on. Again, passing a lie detector test doesn't mean you're telling the truth or lying. Maybe it just means that you believed it. Maybe it believes that the stenographer, whatever term it is, the person doing the lie detector wanted this to be believed. I don't know what was going on. Crazy story, but I wasn't going to paint it as crazy. I wanted to paint it as this was his experience and this is how he presented it. So here's how we presented. And there's, we try to give some more of the context, so you can draw your own conclusions. I don't know what conclusions to draw. Like, I think it's just one of those stories that's just, it's just nuts, and it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You have to say that.
The other way. Yeah. But yeah, you just try to be true to the accounts, yeah.
Cool. Nice answer. And I like that that's your North Star. It makes me have even more kind of faith in your approach, that you absolutely nailed the approach. And I'm curious if working on these stories has changed how you think about the limits of human perception. or whether, this idea about consciousness was in place before. Like, did it affect that?
I mean, I think the consciousness thing came up. It's a little, I admit, it's a little woo, but it's also like, I don't feel like it's jumping to a conclusion in the way that some of the UFOs is jump to a conclusion. Like, you see a weird light in the sky. It's clearly not a UFO. I mean, not a helicopter. It's clearly not an airplane. The jump is to then say it's a UFO, right? In this case, I don't think it's a giant jump to say that it has something to do with our psychology, our consciousness, for as wild as that sounds, because that is consistent with these experiences throughout human history. And I think I got on that bandwagon sort of because, well, other people like Jacques Vallée and stuff had figured it out way before me. And right now it's the best explanation. I think that the mind and consciousness itself is a deep mystery. It makes sense that a lot of us kind of come to these crossroads and think that this is, where the truth lies is somewhere in here. Which means I think it's much stranger than anything we could ever imagine. Unfortunately, it doesn't really, provide a great answer on stuff,
Well, it's a good answer. And that's the thing. There are no answers in this community, right? It's unsatisfying when I was talking to
then you're right.
Like, say again, sorry.
I think this community already has disclosure, like what more do we need? Do we need something official from the United States? Well, we already have it. We have it with, there's a couple of things that we have it on, but one of the most interesting was from the Rendlesham case, John, do you remember John's last name?
Burroughs?
Yeah, John Burroughs, like getting his medical information. So like John, short version of this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, or I get something really wrong here. He has this encounter in Rendlesham Air Force Base in England and sees a UFO, gets really close to this object. A lot more stories to this, especially the fact that he had like a recorder on him at the time. So there's this really creepy recording of him seeing this object. But he has all these heart problems afterwards, these health problems and stuff. And the military won't give him his medical records. And he fights for years and years and years over this. And I think it was like in the last 5 to 8 years or something, he gets them. And in the medical records, it says exposure to UAP ion radiation, something like that. I apologize. That's not the exact phrase, but it was phrases that alluded to this was this craft that just wasn't our thing, whatever it is, right? It didn't say alien, but like this UAP, this sort of non-terrestrial thing, and this known effect of some sort of, I think it's non-ion radiation. I don't know. I apologize. You could look into it, but basically, it's
you're
there
correct.
in the paperwork.
Non-ionizing radiation. Yeah, it's a mouthful, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so it's there in the paperwork. Like, what else do you need? Do you need the it's there, and people's experiences. It's there now. What exactly it is and all that kind of stuff, I can't say, but I think we have disclosure already.
So I guess in that sense, the world has handled it fine. They're almost rolling their eyes and bored of it and on to the next episode of the Kardashians. Yeah. I mean, the whole 2017 thing was pretty mind blowing. I think it also has a lot to say with, the state of the world right now, where I think so many people are either struggling or forced to sort of fight against each other or these larger ideas that like even aliens just wasn't enough for people, like when you have the government saying like, yeah, we don't know what the stuff is. Everybody goes, yeah, but what about this politician? Or I can't afford to buy food and stuff, it's an interesting time to see that reation. Like, I don't think anybody ever wrote that into any science fiction film. Aliens landed and everybody shrugged. that'd be a great title though. Instantly you'd be like, this is different. Yeah. and what's fun is I'll give a plug for my wife's book called Alienated, which you can get on Amazon. And she wrote a story about aliens who show up, but when they show up,
everybody's dead. Like all the aliens are just dead. There's just like the world just populated with dead aliens. So you get the answer, are there aliens? Right. And oh, clearly they're aliens, but then they're dead. The presence of them being dead. And this is it's a fictional comic, not a theory or anything, but it leaves behind all these other questions. It opens up more questions. And I think that's kind of where we're at now. I think the fact that we kind of know that there's some other presence, but really the questions we have about this are so much deeper than, are we being visited? There's a whole argument of like, were they just here all the time? Right. They're like a natural living thing that's here, one dimension over from us, or, there's just all these other theories about, what it could be. But I don't think we're questioning really that are we being visited, or are we encountering something? I think it's clear that we are. And it's a waste of time to try and convince people who don't believe that, they need to have a personal experience.
So I guess on that point, what do you think UFO encounters and all these stories, what do you think they reveal to us about power and authority?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm feeling pretty negative these days about power and authority. The whole question about money, right? Where I keep saying like all of these investigation stuff, it comes down to money. I think at least in America, and I'm sure it's not that much different in other countries, we're just, and I apologize, I know this will go a little into social politics or whatever, but I think we're just run by corporations. We're run by money. The government is run by corporations and money, and you can't vote that out. And the people that are on your side who we're voting for, you and me and anybody who's voting because they think they're looking out for us, they're entangled in all of this, right? I don't know how we can beat it. It is, you can't vote this out. If you boycott your way out of this thing, well, they're so rich. All of Americans stopping to buy a Tesla thing isn't going to stop what's going on there. He controls the satellites, controls all the information. I just don't know what we can do to in the face of that. That parallels to the UFO phenomenon itself. If we're being visited by these other beings of some sort, they're clearly much more powerful than us, that, they can have this presence, have it be known, and also be completely untouched by it all at the same time. So when it comes to power, we're looking at the ultimate power dynamics here, or imbalance of power dynamics, whether it's us as people against the government. I know that's unpopular. Everybody wants to say we the people, we have the power. Right now, I don't know how. All the corporations, they all control all of the information, the news, the algorithms. So like, this idea like, oh, we have the internet, so we can get the truth out there. Well, nobody's going to see your posts. Nobody's going to, if they put the foot down on that algorithm, it won't be seen. You can get out there in the streets. We had some of the biggest protests in the world not that long ago, and it's completely forgotten. And I'm not trying to be a huge pessimist. I'm just saying I don't know about this power imbalance. And I think weirdly, the aliens might have more interest in us than us humans, or have our interest in place more than us humans. I like this theory that somebody pointed out. We haven't destroyed the world yet with a full out nuclear war, right? And there are a few stories about, like, there was that guy in Russia or Germany where the computer glitched in some way, and it looked like America had launched ICBMs, and he decided to not act on it because it didn't make sense. But he was trained to just counter launch, right? And he didn't. So this is one of these moments. This is one of the few that we know where we didn't destroy ourselves. So I kind of get the sense, long ramble, that maybe the aliens are more interested in our safety than us, because maybe they've kept us from destroying ourselves. They could clearly destroy us if they want to. They can make their presence known if they want to. They could keep it completely silent if they want to. So maybe by showing a little bit, they're showing us some hope. I don't know. But yeah, those are kind of power dynamics we're talking about. Like, I don't know. It's either the government or the aliens. One of them is looking out for us. One of them is not.
I like the hope in your answer there. I'm going to take that into 2026 with me. Do you think the most important part of a UFO story is the UFO or the person who saw it?
Right now, it's the person who saw it. If you can somehow get your hands on something that's real, that would be very important. The problem is trusting that information, right? So imagine if you, the viewer, the listener, has a small UFO crash in your yard. You've got the pieces. What happens to it then, right? Who can you trust to send it off to? Is it a university? How long until somebody takes away from the university and stuff, right? So again, that power dynamic, I don't know. So maybe ultimately it's still just the person. It's just our experiences that are probably the most important thing. I always say humans first, no matter what, whether you're talking about the economy, the power dynamics, the UFO community, the UFO experience. I think us as people should come first. The only thing I can prove is like you and I are talking, we have a connection. We get some sort of energy or synergy from talking to each other, relating to each other's work. And I think that's more important than proving anything,
Yeah, I hear you. And you're on the right channel for this, what it means to be human. It's about being human. Love it. Yeah. Thanks for, talking those talking points I sent you. So do you have plans for more to go beyond Red Book? Like I could see a great Brit book kind of thing, with the investigations there, France as well. Please tell me you're doing more.
Oh, we actually had a great suggestion I think it was called Green Book, and it was from South America, like the South American stories.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But those are so wild. Like, I don't know. I mean, the way I've already talked about it, I just don't know. Wow, those things. It makes every American story look pretty mild,
Yeah.
But again, look, people who, you see the interviews with people, there's no reason. I don't see a lot of reason for people in these really small, isolated towns to make stuff up where they could be mocked the way that we were mocked in the 60s and the 70s, especially when you have a heavy religious component going on. Yet the stories are it was on jetpacks and what? Remember the whole jetpack thing? There were some sort of aliens. And then they were maybe there were miners who were trying to, miners with jetpacks? What is going on?
Cutting people's faces off, if I remember correctly as well. And it was what? How is this the correct explanation? But having been there, we went down to Colombia. I don't know if you've seen Phenomenology. I'll send it to you after this if you haven't. But we filmed a documentary where we actually ended up going to a village where all these reports happened, and we filmed the lights on the mountain that these locals were telling us about for the first time in history, and they're thousands of years old.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely send that to you. But it's really cool because we go into the culture and the lore around it, and we talk to police that are just I've had UFO sighting, shrug. That'd be crazy to have it.
What's crazy is their stories are. And when I say there's a psychological component, I'm not dismissing it. I'm not saying it was mass hysteria. I'm saying, doesn't all that seem like an offshoot of consciousness in some way?
Sure.
Because it doesn't make sense, but clearly it happened, or something along these lines happened. It's super fascinating. I do feel we need to do a third book for sure. So, whether it could be that we're very interested in the Rendlesham story because it's one of the best all around UFO accounts. And there's a lot of good information you can get. There's living people that we could interview. So that would be a hope. But yeah, maybe it's Green Book or Brit Book. I like that.
That'd be great. Yeah. And in the UK, you've got the Broadhaven school landing in Wales. There's Calvine, and that's great because it actually developed after 30 years of inactivity. So if you met them, whoever they are, what would be the first thing you ask them?
I would ask them to cure my wife's MS. My wife has multiple
I love it.
And so no lie. So for as much as I seem like I'm shooting down all of these things, that's the goal. Get abducted so, our incurable disease can be cured. Yes. And I know that's selfish, but that's the center of my world, outside of that, what would I think of?
There are so many people you would help with that MS question, though, right? It's not just your wife. There's so many sufferers around the world. So I think that's a solid question.
and outside of that, like I just gotten very philosophical as I'm older of like life is what you make it. Life is what you think of it and stuff. So, the question like where we come from and all that stuff is less important, I think, than who you are now and how you handle yourself and how you see others, So like weirdly, I don't know how many questions there would be. And we're watching that show Pluribus on Apple.
Yeah.
And there's a fascinating thing there about like getting everything you want, right? And like freedom, and how much self-choice is important, even if it's living in a worse world. The importance of having self-choice. So like even having aliens showing up and just asking them to solve everything, takes the responsibility out of our hands. But I don't know. Maybe we're just not responsible enough to solve our own problems. I don't know.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful what you wish for,
Absolutely. Yeah. Pluribus is really interesting in terms of like, I'm surprised. I almost feel like the community is sleeping on it. Like it brings up so many interesting questions about individuality versus a hive mind and how self-sufficient we really are in this world, even when we think we're self-sufficient, and no one's helping us. There's a lot of people helping us.
Yeah. I mean, and I think people are sleeping on it because nobody has money and everything is it's another paid subscription that you have to get. You know what I mean? So it's like a lot of people just aren't going to get to see it because of that,
Yeah. I guess they have time. I think season 2 is like 2027, 2028. So there's time for people to get on that,
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a great show. What a unique look at quote alien life. Like, we just not seen anything like that. Like it is completely unique. So highly recommend it.
Totally. Especially as soon as that opening happened, at the VLA telescope and the signal came down and you had the scientists in what people probably think would be like this, parties going on and like really sexy science happening and stuff. And actually it's just a bunch of nerds around a computer just trying to kick the heels from it under each other and talking about like, maybe it's this and just getting excited.
I love that so much. And it reminded me so much of a Spielberg moment, like in the best possible way. The beginnings of Close Encounters and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it also reminded me of something that, what was his name? It was one of the astrologists, one of the most famous ones. And he was saying we shouldn't listen to any if we got alien contact, we shouldn't accept it at all. We shouldn't listen to alien contact because something that big and much more advanced than us, it was Hawking's, much more advanced than us, we just don't know what we're getting into. And this premise was a perfect example of that. Like just listening to the message was the carrier of this thing. It's like just listening to the alien message destroyed us. Fantastic.
Yeah, it is really cool approach to it. Well, what do you think of the UFO hearings that have been going on? Do you think they're helping reduce the stigma, or is it just like changing shape?
I think it's just more smoke and mirrors. Not a deeper answer than that. And I know there's a lot of true goodwill behind it to get information out there. There are people really, really trying their hardest. Even people who like dance on the sort of entertainment edge of ufology and stuff. Like there's still a real true interest in this thing. And I just don't trust it, and this is largely doing Blue Book. As I'm drawing Blue Book and doing the reference in the 1950s, in the 1960s, the 70s, you see a pattern, and this isn't just a plug for the book, which you can go get, but you see this pattern all the time. The government saying there's nothing. Okay, wait, there's a little something, and we'll have a hearing, and then they'll walk back the hearing, and then they'll give a little bit more, and then they walk it back, and we'll set up this organization, and then years and years later, you find out the organization was BS the whole time. Like that pattern that we've already seen coming out of ATIP and AARO and all these other things and the people involved in them. They just repeating the same exact pattern. So if you do your research into Blue Book, or just the history of ufology, and again, Richard Dolan's really good at this, you'll just see this pattern of opacity and lies and misdirection, and usually there's money behind it. And I think, and not to throw any shade at anybody, but Lou Elizondo himself said, "Don't trust me." That what he's telling you what he believes is true, but he's also saying, "Don't trust me." And whether that's because he wants people to be very careful and to do their research and to follow up on what he says, right? Which I would like to believe, or he's being completely transparent and being as honest as anybody will refuse to see. I don't know which it is. I'd like to think that he is trying to get this information out there, that he's telling you, don't believe him, do the research, follow up, demand more. I'm hoping that's what he's saying. But he's also kind of saying, I'm a disinformation agent. That's where my background is. And I kind of figured it out through Richard Doty. As I was looking at Doty's stuff, I was like, oh, he's saying the same thing. And there's that great documentary, Mirage Men, which Doty is in, and they talk about this use of information. So I forget what your question was, but that's where I ended up.
That's a great answer. And yeah, Lou intrigues me because, I know him a little bit, and he's a real nice guy, very friendly, never asked me to do anything, never said a bad thing to anyone. But also, I know that he's in this for a reason, right? And we could have the reason being complete transparency, and still he's doing counter intel electronically on the community to see what we know and to kind of pull us in a certain direction. Like, people can be well-meaning and still that be a part of it,
Sure. And I think even if he's as good at, from what I understand through my studies and research, if he's as good at being a disinformation agent as the best disinformations are, he doesn't have to do any surveillance or anything. He can just use his language. Just by using your language, you can subtly guide people, by using one word versus a different word. Right. Sure. You can suddenly guide people into this direction or that direction without ever even lying. It's just what you choose to emphasize. And this particular subject is full of people who want to believe it so badly. I hate to say that we're like sheep or lemmings, but there's a little bit of that going on because we want it so badly. And so much of the reason we want it so badly is deeply personal reasons. My mom saw this thing and my aunt had this reaction. It deeply affected me. So I want this to be true. So I want Lou to be true. I want the Betty and Barney Hill story to be true. The living I want to believe poster, right? I hate to say it, we're easy to push in a certain direction, to lead in a certain direction. So he doesn't have to do deep spy stuff on us. Nobody really does. We kind of do it to ourselves.
Yeah, the community certainly takes each other's heels out. And you saying I want to believe in that context as well, that it's really interesting because, Mulder throughout the series of the X-Files, he keeps coming across misinformation. And it's almost like, he's shaking someone like, just let me believe in peace, please. Like, why are you doing this to
me? Yeah.
What would be apart from the ones mentioned already, and you're not allowed to pick Blue Book or Red Book, what would be your favorite UFO alien media? You're not allowed to pick Alienated as well. I know your wife's there, and that would be the good husband thing to
do. In search of, it's not necessarily the best information or whatever, but it was just so, it formulated a mystery, a darkness, a hope, all of these things into this one feeling, that, and Close Encounters of the Kind is really, really up there. One thing that was fun was we had a showing of Close Encounters of the Third Kind when we released Blue Book, and Dark Horse put this big party on.
Oh, cool.
Theater here. Yeah. James Tinian was there and we showed it, and watching it as an adult, it is a completely different movie. I was like, oh my God, this is a movie about a dude having a midlife crisis who literally runs away from his family and gets off the planet. It's not really about the aliens. It's like he's out. He's done with his life.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the end of that movie. The way that the communication between the humans and the aliens kind of becomes this it's a dance of creativity, right? Like the octaves are chosen through math and so on and so forth, but it's a creative dance that they eventually step into and bridge that gap. And there's a really interesting kind of, there's songs throughout history and stuff that people say they've channeled that are about aliens, things like that. So I had to ask, because I'm not going to let you get away without asking. Have you ever kind of experienced something like that? Have you struggled to draw a page in Blue Book and then the ideas just sprung to you overnight?
No. I don't get that sense that it's coming from an external thing.
Okay.
Not in a way that I ever felt conscious, Most of it came out of kind of like the UFO thing. Like it's a deep emotional scarring of mine that drives me to draw and imagine and to I'm an escapist is the way I describe myself. Like I never really want to be here. My thoughts are always elsewhere, so that's where a lot of it comes from.
I like that, and I'm going to steal that answer in the future when someone says, "So are you just a creative?" I'm going to be like, "No, I'm an escapist. I don't want to be here. I'm entertaining myself in my head right now."
Yeah, yeah. And the way that Homer Simpson usually think about hamburgers when people are talking about him, I think about like competitions and stuff.
How do you nurture your creativity?
I make it a priority. And through a series of events in my life, I'm very lucky and blessed that that's what my life is like right now. So, I've got other responsibilities and stuff, but, especially at a place where like financially I depend on it, being able to be creative is the best blessing in the world. I'm constantly in awe and in a state of thankfulness that my life is like this, that I can do this, because I know how many artists struggle with making it, or who have to accept that they have to have a regular full-time job and all this other stuff while they're doing it. So I'm just in a constantly thankful and in awe and exercising it as much as possible and never abusing it.
Do you have any advice for artists who want to get into the industry and do what you do?
Do it for yourself first. If your goal is to make it as an artist, because you're going to make that your career or your financial way of living and stuff, like those are important goals, and you want to reach for that, right? But the very, very first thing you need to do is to make yourself be happy with your art on your own level first. So whether you're painting for yourself, you have just a sketchbook because that's all you have time for, dedicate yourself to that stuff first, because as an artist, as a human being, you really can't count on anything, right? There's very few people you can count on, and you definitely can't count on world events or for society to change or for jerky people to become nice or anything. But you can always sit down there with your painting. You can always draw something. You can always write something. And if you're not happy with it because it's not being published, you've got it backwards. You have to make yourself happy with it first. And then hopefully those other things happen. And if they don't, you're still happy drawing it for yourself. It's this thing that you can count on. It will always give to you. So concentrate on that first.
That's great advice. Only 2 questions left for you now, but these are kind of big ones. So, firstly, what moral lesson do you think should survive from all these UFO stories?
Well, whether it's psychological or not, the message is constantly treat others better. Don't poison your planet. Don't hurt each other. Do better. I think just listen to what they're saying. Like that is the constant message you hear. And then we twist it into, oh, well, that's communism or socialism or capitalism or whatever labels we want to put on it. And we're just not listening to the message. Just be better people, Yeah, I think that's it.
That's a great answer. And you might have even answered this last question in there, I think. But I'll ask it anyway. And if you have any extra thoughts, you can elaborate. But when we look out there, it holds a mirror up to us, to who we are.
Yeah.
Who are we? What are we doing here? So on and so forth. So in the face of all this and all the research that you've done and all the life that you've lived and all the wisdom that you have, what are your thoughts on what it means to be human?
I mean, I think being human is finding a meaning for yourself, which is you find meaning in everything that's happening. Defining your own meaning to things, I think, is important, because having someone else give it to you, whether it's a religion, I'm not being anti-religious, politics, I'm not being anti-political, or philosophy or anything like that. If you're looking for the answers elsewhere, you're not going to be happy. You need to be able to find happiness within yourself, which is a hard thing to do. Think of it like this: like when you go to a therapist, a good therapist isn't going to tell you these are your problems and this is how you fix them. A good therapist asks you questions so that you realize things about yourself. And then you realize how you can change those things. And then that becomes a struggle to maintain, to do, and to work on, right? And I think that's what being human is about. Like, those best answers will come in there. You know, you're not going to find it. You can find hints throughout other things, right? Like, I think religion can give you hints of that. I think politics can give you hints of that. But ultimately, you know, you have to find that happiness inside. Too many people are struggling because they need external things. And it's easy to say that, but I think ultimately that's what being human is. And you'll find that usually by being in some sort of service or thoughtfulness towards others. You know, the way you treat others, the way you want to be treated, but not if you hate yourself. If you hate yourself and you realize, oh, that's why I'm treating other people badly, maybe you need to work on forgiving yourself on some level or whatever it is. Yeah.
Beautiful answer. Thank you. Last thing, if you could just let people know where they could find your work, toot your own horn a bit. If you have any announcements or anything like that you want to throw in, go for it. This is your space.
Easy way to find me. I'm on Blue Sky for the most part, at just at Oeming. Instagram at Oeming. I had a Facebook page, but you know, something happened with that. So like my professional Facebook page, I can kind of access sometimes. Websites, michaelavanoeming.com. Working on Powers with Brian Michael Bendis through Dark Horse Comics. That is ongoing. Big announcements for that's coming up soon. And Blue Book and Red Book, both coming out through Dark Horse as well. You can find me on YouTube. I just did a Hellboy project called Shadow of the Golden Crane. And I've got a bunch of other exciting announcements around the corner. And you can find me on TikTok. And that's it.
That is excellent. So you're everywhere, not Facebook. That's probably best for your mental health, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, go to your libraries, go to your local comic store, ask them for Blue Book and Red Book, and devour it. The art is gorgeous. The stories are amazing. And you'll learn a thing or two, I think. I certainly did, and I've been in this for 40 years now. So thank you for everything you've done, Michael.
Thanks. And I really think your listeners who are interested, not into comic books, would enjoy the Blue Book comics, because it's just a fresh way of looking at things you already know with a slightly different lens. So I think, you know, if you're not into comic books, I still think Blue Book is a good check for you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Spotify or on your chosen platform. If you could like, share, or subscribe, that would be very much appreciated. It helps us find our tribe. If you'd like to support the show and get access to a 1-hour live chat each month and early ad-free access, you can find us at Patreon. Just follow the link in the show notes or at our website, tobehumanshow.com. And feel free to reach out via the contact page or email at hello@tobehumanshow.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, or X at tobehumanshow. As always, remember to be curious. The universe is bigger than we know.
What It Means to Be Human is a double-barrel production. This week's episode was produced by Roz Mugford and Dan Zetterstrom. Sound post-production by Parker Mosley with technical support from Dale Mugford. Our theme music is by Thunderbird.